That kind of thing, I mean, I've learned over the years, it has the potential to really ruin your day.
Yeah, worth a couple minutes to restart.
Unless we went through painstaking efforts, the listener might not know what we're talking about, Jim.
Yeah, fair enough.
We canceled the first take of this after about 30 seconds because something seemed fishy.
And there was some amazing bagpipey wisdom that got dropped in those initial 30 seconds that is now lost to the world. There's no way to
No,
recreate
that's
it,
not
so
true.
that's a shame.
Nope, that's not true. Nothing like that, folks. Yeah, it just didn't feel right. It was like, something's not right here. And then what happens is you get to the end of the recording. It was genius. No recording arrives.
None at all. That is the way it always goes.
Or only the video works and there's no
and
audio,
no
or something like that. Or Jim freezes at 17 minutes in, but we lose the other 33 minutes. The devil's in the detail, Jim.
Yeah.
Sometimes you look at a guy like Jack Lee or Terry Lee and you're like, oh, these guys just assemble several good players together and they have some clever ideas and they put together this great band. Or like, oh man, Piping Hot Summer Drummer, I should do that. I mean, man,
right. How hard could it be?
Yeah, my point is just that. Usually when you sit down to do it, you're kind of correct. It's like that is all it is, but then the devil's in the details.
Yeah. It does seem to prove true in like a pattern in my life as well, that like a big part of doing a thing is sitting down and doing the thing. If you just get to where you do it, you can do it. But yeah, that's in doing it, you discover like, oh, I see. When you do this thing, you need to have such and such a program, or you need such and such equipment, or whatever it is, and you start figuring out those details.
I know. Gary Vaynerchuk is like a entrepreneurial type guy who I've followed off and on over the years, but he's big in the clouds and the dirt. You do have to have your head in the clouds and be thinking big, but then you also have to be able to you literally have to be willing to eat dirt at the same time.
That's a clever metaphor. I thought it was going to be something like keep your roots in the dirt, which I think also can work, but be willing to eat dirt. That's even more visceral.
Yeah. It's so true. Yep, it's so true. You got to be willing to. And by the way, maybe you're not willing to. And I don't think that's a bad thing. No, well, maybe in some cases it's suboptimal. But yeah, maybe it's the reason I've had such a off and on relationship with solo playing. I can do the head in the clouds part pretty easily, but then it's just hard for me to eat the dirt.
Yeah.
I'm less willing. I'm just not that willing. It's also why most people who decide to replicate Dojo University and start an online piping school of their own, so far they haven't lasted because you got to eat a lot of dirt in this business, my friend.
On that note, I have an announcement to make. I'm just kidding.
Oh, well, all the power to you. The more the merrier.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what the alternative name would be if I was going to try to clone Dojo. You know what I call it?
You could call it upipe.com.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, interesting that you bring that up, Andrew, because sometimes you'll encounter this problem where it's almost like it's not necessarily malicious characters, like people in the world, but sometimes there are systems that will start to exist, even products that will start to crop up, that seem to promise that they will make it so you can keep your head in the clouds and never even have to sniff the dirt, let alone eat it.
Yes.
Some miracle product that takes care of the getting in the details and figuring a thing out.
Yeah, there's a lot of that everywhere.
I think we actually talked about this a few episodes ago where you mentioned the fitness industry and how often the problem is that you'll be marketed all kinds of protein supplements and cold plunges and things like that that cost you money that say this will make you an athlete. And
I think you can get a cold plunge. You can get a cold plunge tub.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is just a bucket, I think, with cold water in it.
It's just a big bucket, yep.
You can buy a cold plunge tub at Costco now, I think.
And like we think to ourselves, rather than going to the gym every day or changing my diet, I'm going to purchase that product. And that's going to give me the result that I wanted.
Yeah, the thing about the cold plunge tub is, I wonder how many people buy it, but then honestly haven't thought about the fact that unless you've worked out really hard before using it, it's just kind of a silly additional outside bathtub.
Yeah. Which, you know, having an outside bathtub hasn't always been a marker of like high class or being a good neighbor.
Bagpipe moisture control systems are very much like that. They can be a very effective tool. As a matter of fact, my solo pipe definitely has moisture control in there. But if you never get to the point where you're able to distinguish between your drones being like in tune and slightly out of tune, right? So most pipers that I know are not at that stage yet. They can't actually tell the difference between drones that are close and drones that are locked in, right? We just haven't built that skill level yet. Nothing bad. It's going to happen. But what's ironic is they've spent a lot of money on their moisture control systems, even though they themselves can't really distinguish, can't really hear the difference between drones that are slightly in and slightly out. And that's exactly the thing, right? It's like, I don't need a cold plunge tub. I don't need to call the electrician to install the sauna for my health right now. There's way bigger fish to fry, probably, I'm guessing. And most of us would get the most out of it. There's lots of little things. Does getting all the gadgets feel fun?
Oh,
right?
It does. Yeah.
And it does kind of feel fun, or is it just covering up the unfun truth that's actually bugging you? Is it just putting structure over top of the dirt so that you don't have to come into contact with it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, another maybe even maybe less hopeful and kind of, I don't want to say, is the...
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but Jim, by the way, the listeners don't know this, but you're having a tough morning.
Oh,
you all have to be good cop today. All right,
yeah,
carry
you
on.
be good cop. Yeah,
you said you had something dark to contribute.
I didn't even notice my negative attitude affecting me there, but that is so true, because I was about to say also sometimes you might wonder why a person has a moisture control system if they never are willing to play their pipes long enough that there's any moisture buildup at all
deep
in the instrument.
Yeah.
That's kind of mean of me to say. So good
yeah,
point. I'm in a negative frame of mind right now.
Moisture control systems, I mean, for me, it's not my idea of a good time. And then the other thing that reminds me of, Jim, is the fact that, especially this time of year, I'm just too lazy to nuke my rocks.
Yeah. Yep.
You got to take them all out. You got to get out a baking tray. You got to put aluminum foil down. Then you got to preheat the oven. I guess you could stick them in while the oven preheats. Okay, so we'll do that. And I've never done it a single time. This is just the type of person I am. It's like I've never used maple syrup without my hands getting sticky.
Yeah, I got you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I've never been able to nuke my rocks without dropping several rocks on the floor.
Yeah.
And then either you have to find them, which sucks, or your wife steps on them, which sucks more. So then you're almost always crawling around. And then you take the rocks out, and then you have to let them cool for like 20 minutes because you can't put blazing hot rocks inside plastic little things. So you got to let them cool for a while. By the way, usually you're kind of discovering you wanted to nuke your rocks before you're playing. So this is delaying the onset of playing my bagpipes quite a long time. And on that note, yeah, you probably kind of have to do it. So you have to, there would have to be a lot of preparation. There have been times where I've gotten into the rhythm of it and it's been fine, but just sort of for day-to-day playing, man, it's like not the easiest thing to do. And then you got to funnel the things back in. And don't forget, when the rocks are super dry, it's fairly destabilizing to the pipes. Destabilizing. It's sucking all the moisture right into those rocks right away. So it takes a long time for your pipes to settle with a fresh set of canisters.
Well, then, Andrew, what if you just haven't put enough time and effort into getting really good at nuking rocks, right? So what if I get a moisture control system and I put in a lot of time and effort into becoming a moisture control system expert to where I'm so good at using this gadget?
You got 3 different size funnels.
That's right. Yeah, I'm the man when it comes to using a moisture control system.
And you have a connection that sends you the best rocks.
That's right. The best rocks. Absolutely.
Yeah, man. By the way, is it possible some listeners don't even know what we're talking about? So we're talking about moisture control systems, which are contraptions where you put desiccant rocks inside of them. It used to be a box. And by the way, kitty litter, people experimented with it's almost like a kitty litter-like substance for a while. And now a lot of people use silicone beads or whatever, but it's a desiccant that you put inside. And then the air passes through the box on the way to some tubes that connect to your drones. Okay, and the really cool thing about moisture control is it works. The moisture will get filtered through the rocks. So the air that hits your drone reeds is completely dry and your drone reeds won't get wet.
At Highland festivals, like at competitions, you'll see people taking these contraptions out of their bags and setting them in the sun or something like that to kind of, because once that moisture is collected in the rocks, then you kind of want it to get out of the rocks too, so they can collect more moisture for your competition later that day if they're already full kind of thing.
Yes,
that's what's
exactly.
going on if you see that.
Yeah, well, and so anyway, it's a big thing and it's an incredible invention and it does work. But there's also quite a lot of downsides. And Jim and I were just reminiscing about one of the big downsides, which is it adds a lot of logistics to playing the pipes. right?
Yes, that's my kind of jokey point is, well, if I've spent so much time getting so good at using the moisture control system, that's time I didn't spend playing my bagpipes, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you've got your several connections hooking you up with the best silicone beads, right?
Yeah.
Great. But what could you have done in that time? I mean, you could have spent that at a bagpipe lesson or practicing a bit more, or actually enjoying playing bagpipe music instead of dealing with these contraptions. Or you have all the contraptions in and you never do any of the work, which is kind of what I tend to do during the off season. And then that begs the question, why did I put these darn contraptions in the first place? The canister systems do not make the pipes sound better. They just don't. And don't take my word for it. Read a book. No, that was a little reading a book. No, it has nothing to do with reading a book. Don't take my word for it, right? But if you play a bagpipe that has the moisture control system in, and then you take the same bagpipe and you attach it to like a simple hide bag setup, what you will find is, at least in the short run, the hide bag sounds much better and feels better and produces a better overall sound. Don't take my word for it. That's the most important thing to take away from this. But that's been my experience, and it's been the experience of all of my peers as well. The hide bag sounds better. That's why we play hide bags in top grade 1 bands and stuff. It's because it sounds better, and it's a better home for cane reeds probably too, and cane reeds sound better. So there's trade-offs, right? So when you go with the gadgets, there's trade-offs, and the moisture control system is successful in keeping the moisture off your drone reeds. But there's a variety of downsides that really kind of negatively impact what I would call the natural flow of playing the instrument.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably an important thing to make really clear regarding this whole subject is that you've been saying it's not unlike using a cold plunge or something like that for an elite athlete. These contraptions and gadgets, really good musicians, really smart people have put a lot of time and effort into creating and improving them. They are legitimate things. It's just when and where are they being put to use? If they're being put to use in place of bagpipe fundamentals, that's not what they were intended for in the first place. That's not what they're supposed to be used for. So this isn't a blanket statement saying these gadgets are evil, don't use them, stop buying these people's stuff. No, they're great stuff. Just know when to use them is the thing, right?
Feel the anger, Jim.
Right.
Let the anger flow through you. Shall we back up a smidge? So
let's back up a smidge, yeah.
So commandment number 3. So over the past several weeks, we've talked about immersion as one of my 11 commandments, immersion. We talked about how important it is to immerse yourself and stuff. Not to be confused with immersing yourself. No, you got to immerse yourself, Jim.
You got to immerse it. Yeah.
You got to immerse yourself. Okay. And then thing 2 was daily action, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
The idea that it's better to just brush your teeth for a few minutes every day than to only brush your teeth for a longer session on Saturdays. That would be gross, right?
Yes.
Same with piping,
detrimental
right?
in so many ways. Yeah.
Yep. We want to play our pipes a little bit every day. Okay. And we don't want to be that guy that just gets the pipes out once a month for a big practice session and then ends up putting them away because his life is so busy, his or her life.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then commandment 3, I call simple tools, Jim.
Is that because the working title of Keep It Simple Stupid was a little too abrasive?
Yeah, probably copyrighted. Yeah. But thou shalt use simple tools. Let's go through the basics. What do I say in the text?
So in the text, you do provide us with some analogies to start with. You pose the question, would you want to learn how to drive in a Formula 1 racing car?
So do you remember learning to drive?
I do remember, yes.
Could you imagine that process in a Formula 1 race car? Like I'm picturing they've got a lot of knobs there. Even the steering wheel doesn't look like a normal steering wheel.
The Oldsmobile that I was in at the high school was complicated enough for me, that's for sure.
Yeah, and there's probably all sorts of stuff going on inside the car and a whole bunch of knobs and switches. I actually don't really know that much about Formula 1 race cars, but the race cars that they're using to race are complex.
What if you were learning to drive in one of those cars and like at an event? So you also have a whole crowd shouting and cheering and yelling, and then you have like a team who's like trying to get like commands from you and stuff. I mean, maybe it'd be cool, but it also might be stressful. Might be a little stressful.
Yeah. And then whereas when I learned to drive, it was just in the old family beater car, but it was very simple. It was very simple. Yet I remember my first experience when I was driving, I remember being like kind of taken aback at how complicated it actually was.
Yeah, I remember.
Like there's a lot of little details that I didn't realize the very first time I sat in the driver's seat, even though I'd been driving around for 16 years as a passenger. Like, I don't know, did you have that experience too? It's like, wait, like first you have to put your foot on the brake. And then you have to turn the key, but then you got to make sure your lights are on. And then the other fun thing that I'm not sure I realized is it was automatic transmission car. When you shift it into drive, that sucker starts driving unless you put your foot on the brake.
It'll just go.
It just goes, which I did not realize. And so anyway, it was like even the most simple setup of a car, right? Like a tested car that only has a couple steps to get it going. Like it's still enough steps to be kind of overwhelming at first. And there's a variety of things you have to understand and get used to, even in the simplest of scenarios. And so it would be terrible to learn to drive in a complicated vehicle. By the way, shout out to all of those people out there in our audience who learned how to drive a manual. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well done. Hats off.
So much more.
Cheers to you. Later in life, I learned to drive a manual, and it's definitely an interesting kind of cool thing, but it's wildly more complicated.
Yeah, that didn't come till later in life for me either. And it's I think, good thing. For me, it was definitely better to ease into it from automatic to manual.
Have you driven a Tesla yet?
I've not driven a Tesla yet.
I've driven one.
And was that like a whole different experience?
It is a whole different experience. I'm not actually sure you'd want to learn to drive in a Tesla. I'm not 100% sure.
Interesting.
Because it's different. And is it simpler or not? I'm wondering if you sat down in a Tesla and learned on that, if it would be simpler or not. Maybe it would.
Not having the direct experience myself, maybe I'm way off the mark here. But in thinking about this topic and some of the things that you mentioned in this part of the course, I was thinking to myself about like I have a son who's learning, he's very into art right now. And of course he started by sketching on paper like any kid does. And I was showing him how to use a drawing pad with the computer, right? Which is a different experience because you're drawing like on a pad down here and seeing it up on the monitor. And there are some tools in the software that he was using that are modeled after French curves, which anybody who's done a lot of drawing or drafting is going to be familiar with French curve tools. They're kind of like rulers that have specific curves on them, so they work as a guide for you when you're drawing things. And the computer version of it is nice because you have a bunch of different options for French curves, and you can change their sizes as well, so you can just glide them bigger and smaller. So it's like it takes the thing that's like physical and makes it even more complicated in a way, but more useful if you know what it is. He was like blown away, like, what do I do with this? What is this even for? So I showed him a physical French curve and said, see how this works on paper? That's the idea behind this. Then it made sense to him. And I wonder if it's a similar thing with the Tesla where like, even if it's better in some ways, right? If it's modeled after something that's different from it, maybe you need to know the thing in order to, I mean, that's me speculating. I don't know.
Yes. I think I agree with you. And I think I don't want to get too deep down the rabbit hole again, but I think that we have to be familiar, and we have to become personal friends, maybe not friends. We have to become personal adversaries with the actual problem. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's right. It's like if you don't have the problem of drawing good curves, I would imagine that you're not initially going to be super impressed. You might not even notice that tool.
Totally. Yeah. If you've never been in that situation where you're like, I need that
I've done
tool,
Photoshop. You know? I've done my fair share of Photoshop, right? And then there's all those things and that you can do that you have no idea. And so you generally just sort of ignore it. And you're just like, okay, I have this magic wand. That's something that I want. And then I like the layers. That's cool. But everything else, don't have the slightest idea. But then I've had the opportunity to sit down next to real graphic artists. And then you watch them and they use all the tools and you're like, holy crap, that's what that's for?
Yeah.
And then they make this amazing stuff and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's maybe bringing us closer to bagpipes too. I spent years kind of going backward when it comes to music editing, where I started in a digital audio workstation. Yep. And only in adulthood have I had even still some limited exposure to physical audio workstations and started to go, oh, that's why there's such and such a setting, etc. in the DAW, because it's based off of this physical board that has these knobs here because they relate to this input here. You know what I mean? In a backward way, I've started to see, oh, that's why the digital tools exist. They're modeled after these physical tools.
And so I'll have to put more thought into it. And I haven't had much time to drive a Tesla around, but I wonder if it gets you up close and personal with, or close enough to the thing. And I mean, certainly a lot of the lane guidance assist and the autopilot and all that stuff. It's like when you learn to drive, you don't want that stuff. You want to learn the basics. And you have to learn the basics of the rules of the road and so on and so forth. And so it's going to be kind of interesting how that's all going to go.
Yeah.
Like in the future, because obviously the Tesla design is like the future. It's happening. But I wonder if it's going to be good or bad. We'll see.
So then in a similar way, some of these gadgets that, again, absolutely have their place and they can be useful, but they might be covering up, basically using your analogy from the beginning, like keeping you away from the dirt when what you need is to get in the dirt.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel? You're a guy that drives a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got an
Yeah, I'm a guy who drives. Yeah.
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about a young driver hopping in the car and spending most of their time on autopilot?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to sound too much like an old fart, but it does stress me out a bit. I mean,
because there's going to be situations that the computer doesn't have creativity or wisdom.
Right.
So there's going to be situations that require that. But if you never use it, because you always use autopilot, that seems, my knee-jerk reaction is there's going to be a lot more random, seriously dangerous things happening when the majority of people on the road are using autopilot. That's just a knee-jerk. That might not be true. That would have to be tested against reality. I just think it's interesting. It's sort of a moisture control argument all over again. It's like, can that be useful without having a lot of experience with the underlying problems that it was designed to solve?
Yeah. Yeah, it might make my son angry if he ever hears this someday, but my sister had a really great hookup and helped us get set up with an electric scooter that we were going to give to him a year or two ago. And after we got it, and my wife and I looked at it, and it said it would go up to 27 miles per hour. And we went, you know what? Let's just get him a normal scooter first. Let him manually push a scooter around for a while and get confident with how to turn, how to stop, how to stay balanced. And then we'll get him a motorized scooter. So we gave that back to my sister, and she did something else with it.
Totally. And when you have kids, it's a thing. So my son has a skateboard, and this is the same with every kid. And I think, because I was the same when I was a kid, and I think you're going to be familiar with this too, because you have 97 more kids than me. The kids, when they get the skateboard, their first impression, and we talked about this in the Bagpipe Freedom era too. It's the coming up close and personal with the hierarchy of competence.
Oh, yes.
When you get the skateboard, step one is thinking, this is awesome and going to be so easy and fun and instantly make life better. And then when they get on the skateboard, it slips out from underneath them.
Yeah.
If they don't fall on their butt, they come awful close. And then they have this look of panic. And then they have an inevitable freak out and meltdown about the fact that it's not easy.
Yep. Been playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater too much. You think it's going to be like that in real life.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's not really like that. It's not really like that. And there's like a huge learning curve. And only after a serious amount of practice does it become kind of like fun and interesting to do. You become up close and personal with the problem, usually through some initial trial and major error. Yeah.
So, but again, I remember as a kid, I spent what little money I could scrape together and quite a bit of time purchasing, trading, and then swapping in and out different wheel bearings, wheels themselves of different materials, trucks, risers for the trucks, grip tapes. So much time was spent on that stuff that I wasn't skating. I'd be a much more competent skater now if I just got on the stock basic board that I had and went and rode around.
Maybe. I never was much of a skateboarder. Jim, I'm too top heavy, man.
Yes.
Skateboarding and skiing and this stuff, it's like when you're heavy, the learning curve is a lot more painful because you go a lot faster and you fall a lot harder. So I think I never quite got into it. You know?
Yeah, no, I feel it more now that I'm a grown up. I definitely look back on my lightweight childhood days and think, oh, I didn't know how good I had it.
Yeah, exactly. Some people are just naturals, but that wasn't me.
To this point of suggesting that like beginners and learners don't start on highly complicated versions of what they're doing, you say, of course they don't start on highly complicated versions of what they're doing. That wouldn't make sense.
Not the successful ones. Yeah.
And so you say high-end sophisticated tools are designed for masters of their craft. They're not suited to beginners or intermediates. So again, it's not saying that these high-end gadgetry things are bad, just that they weren't ever even intended for beginners. That's not what they're for.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, you look at like airplane pilots and they fly the big airplanes and they have all those crazy buttons. But that's not how they started. And these are airplane pilots that have like thousands and thousands of hours of flight experience. And they still need to go and do deep training on their aircraft on an ongoing basis to stay up to speed on everything and to make sure they still understand all the protocols, because it's like pretty complicated and it's a big thing. It's really difficult. So again, that's a complicated tool that's there for a very specific purpose. And it's complex for a very specific reason. And those airplanes don't even do that much, right? They go up in the air and they fly, I think, in a fairly simple manner, and then they land. But it's very complicated because I think the stakes are extremely high and there's no margin for error or whatever, right? But you don't learn to fly that way. You don't. You learn in a much, much simpler aircraft, right? And the same should be true for bagpipers.
Yeah.
And even drummers, but drummers don't have quite as much of a problem with this as pipers, because the instrument is much more simple to begin with.
As an enterprising person, I'm now going to start inventing gadgetry to sell to drummers, things that they don't need, but I'm going to try to sell them.
Try and slow them down.
The mean joke that comes to my mind is, drummers don't even buy their own drums, so why would they buy gadgets and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's part of it too. Yeah. And drummers are just smarter than pipers.
That's what it is, really.
If you want us around, you're going to have to pay for all of our stuff.
That's right. If you want me, show me that you want me. Yeah.
And what are those internet memes where it's just like Matthew McConaughey and Matt Damon or Michael Caine and stuff just doing those nods, just like the man nod?
Yeah.
That's like what drummers should be, the receiving end of that meme, because they figured it out. And by the way, our sticks, you can go ahead and buy our sticks.
You can buy those for us too on a repeating,
year,
like a regular basis. Please buy me more sticks.
Yeah, exactly. At least once a year, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem. Oh, you don't want to pay for our sticks? Oh, yeah. Well, there's a band down the street that's looking for drummers.
They're offering me 2
budget.
sets of sticks.
And then you're like, fine, here's your sticks. I mean, pipers, we get our band reeds, and that's about it usually.
If that. It's not always even that.
Yeah. I've played in a few bands where you get your own bag, which is they'll buy a bag for you. So that's nice. But anyway, okay, Jim. So beginners should play a simple bagpipe.
Yeah, because, and like one reason for this is to get, as you were saying, metaphorically in the dirt, right? Like it can be a challenge, but you're like right up against it. You're right up close and personal with what is going on with your instrument. And that's a good place to learn about your instrument. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So just to get practical, there are a couple of things, right? So here's a great example of a gadget that has no place in the learning curve of a piper at any point ever. It has a variety of names. And actually, I'm hoping that this name isn't like trademarked or anything, so I don't get sued or anything. I don't think I would. You never know. I'm kind of worried now. But they're called tone enhancers, okay? They have no place anywhere. They don't enhance the tone. Okay? They don't.
But do you know what? Do you know how many years I had tone enhancers in my stocks?
Oh, you could tell me any number of years and I would not be surprised. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of times bagpipes are sold with the tone enhancers in. What? That's bananas. Now there's no need in the world for tone enhancers. What they really do, the real reason I think people are interested in them is because they make starts and stops easier.
They'll also save your reed from falling in the bag. Your reed will never fall into the bag if you got tone enhancers.
There you go. So you get
reed catchers is what they should have called them.
Yeah. But they don't really enhance the tone, in my experience. They can smooth out, they can mask unsteady blowing. But in my opinion, and again, I'm just one person. My opinions are just my opinions. So I'm certain there are people out there with differing opinions. And that's okay, but also you're wrong. No, but that's also my opinion too. So we're going in circles here. But what we really need to do, the reason the tone enhancer isn't great, in my opinion, is because it doesn't really enhance the tone. Okay. And also it masks a lot of problems that you're going to need to learn how to solve. It does help your starts and stops by making it so you don't have to properly do them.
So that's like the lane assist. You should learn how to stay in the lane by yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. And you're going to need to know that, right? It's like when the weather's really bad and your car's computer can't see the lanes anymore, you're going to need that skill. And then you'll find that you don't actually have the skill to start or stop your pipes if you're ever in the situation where you don't have it. And by the way, starting and stopping your pipes is not that difficult to do, but you have to learn how, right? So anyway, tone enhancer, not necessary. I will say this though. I think that the tone enhancer and the degree to which it helps the starts and stops is a byproduct of the Gore-Tex pipe bag that was introduced to the market a long time ago. Now, a Gore-Tex pipe bag is a really kind of interesting thing where generally speaking, although I have a couple more things I'd like to say about this, but generally speaking, the Gore-Tex bag takes the hide bag and makes it far simpler. And this is something where my thinking has changed over the years. I used to be like, you must play a hide bag. If you're within a 10-foot radius of me, you must be playing a hide bag, whether you're a beginner or not. And so if you're a beginner, we're going to tie it. But I've changed my thinking on this over the years, and a synthetic bag is the way to go. It's simpler. And the simpler tools you can use for starters, the better. And so now I'm kind of up for a synthetic bag. But there's one property of a synthetic bag that's very problematic for a learner and makes things far more problematic, far more difficult. And that's the floppiness factor of the bag. So the problem with the Gore-Tex bags is they're extremely floppy, and therefore it's extremely difficult to control the bag as you are starting and stopping your pipes. And so if you buy a super floppy synthetic bag, you're going to really struggle in the beginning when you're starting and stopping your pipes. Glenn Brown was like, "What are you talking about, bro? I can stop my floppy bag, no problem." And it's like, yeah, but you didn't learn on that floppy bag.
I see what you mean.
I don't think so. And so, yeah, you can absolutely start and stop a floppy bag, but it takes a lot of experience and skill, in my experience as well, and practice, and you got to get good at it, and you have to have an awareness of what's going on, and you have to be in control of those problems. So anyway, what I would recommend nowadays is would be a synthetic bag for a beginner, but one that's as rigid as possible. I think several of the makers have like a hybrid version of a bag. And really all it seems to mean, and again, I'm not really well studied on these, but what it seems to mean is it's a synthetic bag, but it's more rigid. The material is a lot thicker.
That's been my
which makes
too,
it, it brings it a lot closer to the feel of a hide bag, which is fine, but also extremely useful in terms of being able to control your starts and your stops. So if you start playing, you don't need the tone enhancers in, right? The tone enhancers introduce quite a bit more complexity and really mask some essential problems that we're going to have to learn how to solve as bagpipers. So we can yank those out, and instead you can install a rigid synthetic bag. Right?
Or a hide bag.
But even a hide bag, I wouldn't recommend at all at this point. For a beginner. Now I'm talking about a beginner. By the time you're an intermediate, I would still absolutely recommend a hide bag because you get, in my experience, and again, don't take my word for it, but in my experience, a hide bag is going to give you better quality of tone. It's going to offer you better overall bagpipe stability and stuff as well in the long run. But in the short run, that rigid synthetic bag, I think, is probably the way to go for a beginner. And that's the reasoning behind my thinking. That allows us to start off with a very simple setup. The other thing that for me doesn't make sense is bagpipes hardly ever don't have a water trap of some kind pre-installed. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, when I started playing, there was already a tube system in my bag.
Yeah.
So that's how I started. It took a while before that thing came out.
And then how much did you understand about why it was in there when you first started?
Nothing.
Yeah, me either. I still barely understand it. No, I somewhat understand it now. And it can be a cool tool. Don't misunderstand me. The point of this is not that water traps aren't cool. Water traps are kind of cool. I think I kind of like them. But like, why do you need it? And as a beginner, you do not need it. And in my opinion, you should not use it right away, at least in the beginning. Let's learn to play bagpipes. And let's come up close and personal with some of the inevitable bagpiping problems. And one of them is the onset of condensation inside the pipes, right? But once you're familiar with that problem, you should get familiar with that problem. What happens when the drone reeds start to accumulate condensation? It's like, oh, now things bad are happening. I can't tune my pipes that well anymore.
And suddenly one of them isn't making noise at all.
Right. And one of them isn't making any, they're totally saturated with moisture. And then maybe at that point you could put in a water trap, right? And again, start with the simplest water trap design that's reasonably possible. Pop it in there and see what happens. What you might find is, this actually doesn't do that much at all. which is sort of what I found. I mean, that's not really going to solve the onset of condensation problem as effectively as you think. The other thing I would say is, if the water trap does help, it's usually to a very subtle degree, which isn't really relevant or appropriate to a beginner anyway.
Which makes it so similar to things like the athlete using an ice bath. It is helpful, but it's a subtle help, and it's at this peak end of it. Man, I feel a little bit bad. I have friends with ice baths. I don't want to make them feel bad. If it feels good, do it. That's fine.
Well, that's just it.
Bad. Go for it.
Yeah, and maybe an ice bath is really fun, or extremely unfun, and so you feel extremely
useful.
Yeah, so you feel extremely good about using it because self-torture is something that you believe is making you better, which is making you feel happy. And so if you do the math, it's like, okay, cool, man. Ice bath, it's better than other things you could do to torture
I just
yourself,
count myself lucky that my daily life provides me with sufficient torture as it is, so I don't have to go looking for more.
Yeah, I think ice baths are kind of dangerous though too. Don't people kind of stay in there too long and then end up kind of unable to move to get out of the ice bath?
I've heard of this happening. Yeah, and this might be another great tie-in to the gadgetry with the bagpipes, is that not to make light of medical emergencies or anything like that, but it's like, if you are an advanced athlete where this is going to make a difference, you're either going to understand how it works and how your body responds to it, or you're going to have a medical professional there, like a coach or a trainer or something, who's going to be able to help you use it correctly. If you're a beginner getting into an ice bath all by yourself, the first weekend you've worked out in 30 years, it could be not only not super helpful, it could actually be dangerous. And that might be the same
I think
case
it could be
with
dangerous,
gadgetry.
man. Yeah, the sauna kind of freaks me out. It's like, what if something happened to me in there and I couldn't get out?
I like the way it feels so much. I'd be fine with going that way, honestly. I love getting steamed up real good.
I actually have a horrifying story, which I absolutely cannot tell on the air.
Well, this story is
about a near-death experience I had in a sauna.
My goodness. Some Final Destination stuff going on.
It's not as bad as it sounds, but it's also completely horrifying. And so maybe this is all just about my sauna experience.
Is this a promise that someday in future the Dojo Insider podcast will just be Andrew tells all?
I absolutely can never tell that story on the air. Because I think
so
the story is specific enough.
On a Dojo cruise.
No, and by the way, it didn't have anything to do with the bagpipe world. It was just in my personal life. So everything's safe, everybody. But yeah, there you go. Saunas. You got to watch out for it. Carl Donnelly, who's my business partner and one of the great teachers on the Dojo and stuff, he has a great thing he says about simple tools. The reason you need to use simple tools is that when bad things happen, you want to know that you're the cause, right? You want to know that it's you, and you don't want to be wondering if it's you or not. So if you have all these gadgets in the bag and then something happens and your pipes don't sound good, whose fault do you want it to be? And in a weird way, if you think it through, you want it to be your fault because you're the person that's capable of making changes and doing things. You don't want to be blaming it on some other gadget. Oh, my rocks got wet and that's why my drones went out of tune. Or is that actually true? Now, if that's actually true, that's one thing. Oftentimes, way more often than the rocks getting too wet, is that you're not blowing steadily or you don't have the reeds set up properly. So you're introducing so many more variables to a system that's already extremely complex that you don't know where to look when there's a problem. And that's why you need to start simple and build in complexity from there.
That is a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
So a nice simple setup.
Additionally to that, also, I'd imagine the part of the problem there is time. Again, the time that you spend doing the detective work to figure out where in your complicated system the problem was is time that you're not playing your bagpipes.
Yeah. I sometimes like to dabble in like computer code and do fun stuff with that. And occasionally I've had the chance to sit down with people who actually know how to code and like they can solve the problem I was trying to solve with like 200 lines of code. And they're like, no, just do it like this. And they write 7 lines.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's incredible. It's the same sort of thing. It's like the beauty and the truth of it is usually very simple.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem like it's a feature of being a beginner though, and it's not like a bad thing. It's understandable. I mean, I'm there myself with other things too, and have been there with bagpiping, that of course what you've seen tends to be complex, or at least you perceive it to be. And so if I was like, I don't know, an uninitiated pilot, and I'm like, I'm going to fly planes. I'm so excited to sign up for my first flight lesson. And then I find out it's a simple little prop plane with one switch and a steering wheel. I'd be like, oh, that's not as cool as the pictures I've seen with all the dials and stuff. When can I get on those?
Well, and it reminds me of Daniel LaRusso's
Of course it does.
journey to self-defense. Because
hopefully everything reminds you of that, Andrew Douglas.
But the movie is a beautiful illustration of that, right?
That's a good point, yeah.
Well, so Daniel LaRusso shows up with Mr. Miyagi. And really, Mr. Miyagi initially is kind of like, who's this weird? But he kind of sees that the kid's getting bullied. And he has a real problem on his hands. So again, there's the theme of understanding or becoming up close and personal with the real problem. So he has a real problem on his hands that self-defense might actually potentially pose a real solution to.
Yeah.
And so that's why Miyagi agrees to get involved with Daniel LaRusso in the first place. But then what's the process look like of self-defense? It's like, well, first of all, we have to do this wax on, wax off motion like 1 billion times. I suppose you become strong in that motion and whatever. And it's also testing your resolve. And initially, the beginner's not even aware of the problem that's solving.
Yeah.
Right. And it's only at for lack of a better term, the come to Jesus scene where LaRusso's about to quit. And Mr. Miyagi's like, "Hoy,
show me,
sand the floor." And then he has the epiphany. Oh my gosh, look at these problems I can now solve.
It can feel that way even just diving into like practice chanter. People want to play bagpipes and they show up to their first lesson. And it's like, well, here's a not bagpipe.
Yeah.
That can be hard.
Not bagpipe. Oh man, it can be hard. And then by the way, bagpiping seems great. But then I'm working with a set of beginners right now. And I mean, it's been like 6 weeks and we're barely getting a low G. Just being able to cover the holes.
Yeah.
It takes a really long time to figure out how to do, and it's very, very tricky. Some people get it right away, and I'm not sure why. And for some people, it's very difficult. I think it might have to do with your fascination with the problem or your excitement about the potential. Because for me, I don't remember it taking a long time to get a low G. But I think I was also like super stoked to get started. And maybe it did take me a long time, but I did it inside of a short period of time. I worked hard at it or something maybe.
Speaking of tone enhancers, as you list in this course, products that aren't necessarily useful and also some that could be useful. And I did think it was kind of funny as I was looking down the list of the products that you don't need. You say here, you even say, if you're a beginner and you have these installed right now, you say, I would encourage you to remove these immediately. And I'm like, oh, I have had all of these in my bagpipes at different times.
Yeah. And it's not, and remember, I would encourage you to remove them immediately. And even with the tone enhancer, it's not necessarily a bad product. Okay.
So it's not remove them and throw them away and never think about them again.
Right. Exactly. Now I personally, I can't picture a single situation where I would use a tone enhancer, but it is a cool tool and it does do the thing it's supposed to do. It does restrict the airflow to the drones, which makes starts and stops easier. And it does cover up unsteadiness in blowing. It also, unfortunately, sort of detracts from the quality of the sound that you get out of the drones. And for me, maybe I'm just sort of like a paleo diet bagpipe tone guy, and I just would never want to decrease the quality of the tone if I could possibly avoid it. Maybe, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting bored with that, though, in my old age. Tough to say. So the tone enhancer is a tool. But anyway, it's not because they're bad. It's because we want to go simple.
Yeah.
Right? Getting our instrument as simple as it could possibly be gives us huge leverage to learn the art of playing better.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what was the list?
Oh, there was tone enhancers. There were canisters, hoses, etc. that attach to the bottom of your stocks inside.
Yep.
The desiccant tools, like you mentioned at the beginning, the Roxets and the kitty litter and all that. Complex drone reed designs. The what?
Yeah. The chamois.
The chamois. Yeah, the chamois. Yeah. Complex drone reed designs and or moisture absorbent drone reeds.
Now, by the way, those could be great. I mean, we've all seen all sorts of crazy drone reed designs where the drone reeds have all these Allen keys and things that you can tinker with to do whatever. And for a beginner, no, not doing it. By the way, Easy Drone, I think, has a moisture absorbent thing, which sounds pretty darn cool. I might want to give it a try sometime, but for a beginner, no. Go simple. Go with a simple, easy drone design. A Canning drone reed comes to mind. A Selby comes to mind. A canard comes to mind. Like where we have the reed body, we have the tongue, and we have an adjustable bridle. And that's basically what it is. Go with that design for starters.
Well, and there again, Andrew, I feel interested at least in this idea that design is as close as you're going to get without getting just a cane drone reed to a cane drone reed, right? That's what it's modeled after. And so now my reeds right now have a lot of adjustable parts, and I'm glad they do because I experiment with them now. I didn't, but I wouldn't have known what to do with them when I was younger. And so just calling back to the Tesla being a model of driving a, real car, or like a digital audio workstation modeled after a physical one, the French curve on the computer, versus if your drone reed looks as close as possible to a reed, like reed, that's probably the place to start, right?
The fewer moving parts it has, the better it sounds. Has been my experience through almost all bagpipe gadgetry. Like the fewer moving parts it has, the better it's going to sound. And it's not to say that there aren't downsides, but I even feel that way about the grommets on pipe bags. So you can get a hide pipe bag now that comes with rubber grommets.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't, the drones don't, drones with rubber grommets do not sound as good as drones that are tied in. And again, don't take my word for it. And you might use grommets and compare it to a bag without grommets, and you might say, Andrew's full of crap. And so if that's the case, that's the case. But my experience is grommets dampen the sound of my drones and make them sound less good. By the way, they fail way more often than a standard tie-in fails. The upside of a grommet is it's easy to tie in. When you want to put your stocks in, it's no big deal. And you don't have to have any expertise, and you can just tie them in. So there's something to be said for that, but that's sure enough, more moving parts there, less good it sounds.
Yeah, I don't have as distinguishing an ear as you do, Andrew, for tone quality on drones, but that has always been the thing that's made me nervous about grommets on the hide bag, as well as synthetic bags too. It's just that I've seen so many, anywhere that there's a seam, I've seen those seams rip so often. And so when I've got just a simple hide bag with no zip or anything on it, I think to myself, like, there's the main seam that sews it together into a bag, and that's it. That's way fewer failure points for a hole to develop.
And that's been like,
just me.
That's a little rule of thumb. And I don't think it's always, I'm certain it's not always true, but that's a rule of thumb. So whenever something violates that, I always think to myself, okay.
So you don't throw it out, but you're cautious about it. You think about it more carefully.
Yeah, a lot of hide bags and stuff come with zippers now too. And a zipper, I can't think of any real way that's going to change the sound. So maybe that's not true for a zipper, except for the fact that now you can put the gadgets inside your bag, and so it's allowing you to make things more.
It's leading you down
towards
the path
complexity.
Of temptation.
Yes, it leads you down the path of That's exactly right. And so maybe for that reason. And then the other thing is, I've seen those zippers fail, man, at inopportune times.
Yeah.
So if you don't need one, we probably don't want to use one. You don't have to agree with me, and you can be skeptical of what I'm saying, and definitely give it a try yourself. It's just been my experience.
Yeah, and like you say, some people might try this out and go, Andrew's full of crap, or they might also, there's a middle ground there where they might go, I see what Andrew's saying about how this affects the tone of my drones. However, the trade-off for how much easier this makes whatever it is they're doing, or how much more solid it makes, is worth it to me. Well, that makes sense. If it's worth it to you to have those grommets to trade off that tone adjustment versus how easy it is to pop your stocks in and out.
Even with the tone enhancers. In my old age, Jim, I mean, look, I'm approaching old age. It's happening. In my old age, I'm way softer on the tone enhancers now than I used to be.
Yeah. I remember slide hearing a lot more rhetoric often from you. Yeah. I remember you really ripping on them before. Yeah.
Well, and I do. I still believe those things. If someone close to me was learning the bagpipes, I would not allow it. Okay? Just wouldn't. However, I get it. You can't you can't enjoy being in a parade band if people in the band cannot stop and cannot start their pipes.
That's what you mean, yeah.
It might be one of those situations where maybe you go with the tone enhancers and then you have a plan that you're actually prepared to follow through on for getting rid of those tone enhancers. Maybe you could get rid of them one at a time or something, or I don't know, some sort of plan for graduating away from them. Like maybe that would be an okay solution. This isn't meant to be a hard edge thing. It's a principle, right? And one of the things that you'll find is you're going to have a lot of problems in your piping journey, a lot. And I'm talking with the bagpipes specifically. you're going to have so many problems and you're going to have so many challenges. And a lot of things are going to go horrifically wrong. And after enough of them go wrong, you're going to realize, I think, and certainly what I realized is the complexity that I currently have myself set up with is contributing to a lot of these problems, and it's making a lot of these problems extremely excruciating to try and get to the bottom of why they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to want a simple setup.
Yeah.
It's just like the way that it is.
That makes so much sense. I mean, not without knowing that's what was going on. I can think back through like the journey that my instrument has taken, and it's gone from more complex to way simpler. And now a tiny bit of complexity has been reintroduced, but very purposefully because of wanting that tool kind of thing.
Yep. And then the other great irony is most people who fail in their efforts to become a good bagpiper, one of the reasons they fail is because they claim they don't have the time to devote to all of the important bagpiping stuff, right? It's the thing you hear most often. I just don't have the time to do the right things. But then the irony is they have extremely complex bagpipes that they refuse to make more simple and go with the simple thing. And so the irony is all the time you do have, you're spending fussing with your instrument instead of being set up with something simple that you can pick up anytime and play. Your bagpipes, being able to pick them up anytime and play them with enjoyment is such an important element to learning. So simple tools set up well, that's a big one. Immersion and doing a little bit every day. Well, how do you do a little bit every day? Well, if you have to nuke your rocks, in addition to checking your bagpipe for all the normal stuff, you also have to check like all the connectors between your different hoses and make sure your tone enhancer didn't get slightly dislodged. And you got to tweak the Allen screw on 8 of your drone reeds. And you got that little
sponge. I had 8 drone reeds.
Yeah, you got that little spongy thing down around your chanter reed to try and soak up the moisture.
Right.
Like all that stuff. If all you're ever doing is...
Don't forget to adjust your solar blanket that sticks out in front of the top of your chanter. Adjust your solar blanket as well.
Yeah. Good point. I actually kind of like the solar blanket. I think it's cool. It definitely looks amazing. So, but anyway, my point is, I think a lot of us spend more time farting around than piping. And then
what you just described, that's your little bit every day. You didn't even get to the bagpipes. Like your time is gone. You didn't even get
there. Well, and a lot of times you're not going to bother walking over to your pipes because there's too much friction to actually getting the things going.
Yeah.
Right. So, simple.
Well,
keep it simple,
like
stupid.
There it is. That has been hovering in the background through this entire conversation, hasn't it?
Kiss it, man. Just kiss it.
So I feel like it seems like we're maybe wrapping toward a conclusion, and I really want to give air to my favorite quote from this lesson in the course.
Yes.
Want to make sure we don't miss this. So,
by the way, this is totally me. This is totally me and not Camille. She may have like smoothed it out a little bit.
Yeah, but let's not go giving her credit. This is Andrew.
Occasionally I have to stick up for myself.
Yeah.
Occasionally, Jim, I have to stick up for myself, and I have to let you know that I think I wrote most of this.
So here's the statement.
Yep.
Strip your instrument back and stop relying on fancy gadgets. Sorry, I started reading the wrong quote.
Yep.
That's a different highlight.
I mean,
that's another good one.
I was like, Jim, you're letting me down here.
I'll either edit this later or I won't. I don't know.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
So here's what I wanted us to make sure we got to. So you say, you can buy all the complicated gadgetry you like, but it's not going to make you a better player. It doesn't even actually make your life easier either. And here's the kicker. It just replaces the challenges you should learn to overcome with different, irrelevant challenges.
Yes.
And that's where I'm like, what if I get so good at nuking rocks? Great. That's not what I've signed up for, though.
It reminds me of all the pharmaceutical ads that our country has allowed to be all over television. It's horrendous now, by the way. Other companies don't even bother advertising.
Yeah.
We're watching a show on Hulu right now, and so it has the ads. 90% of the ads are just like
these medications with weird generic names that are words that aren't quite words. And are you pointing toward the crazy long list of side effects that comes?
Well, the best one I saw was the most insane one is, do you have sporadic Parkinson's-like shakes as a result of this drug that you're taking? And like this poor woman is portrayed as like her body just I guess it's just shaking randomly and she can't control it because of a drug that she's already on. So it's like, are you having these awful, like horrendous body shakes as a result of a drug that you're on? Well, here is another drug that you can take to stop those shakes.
Yeah.
And it's horrible because I'm sure these drugs do solve really serious problems. So this is not, I'm not doing this to joke at people's expense, but it's just bananas. And then it's like, here's this drug you can take. And then you're like, wait for it. And then they're like, common side effects of this drug are basically going back to the original problem you had before you took the first drug that this drug is supposed to help you recover from. And by the way, if you're having dark thoughts, that's like common, and like all these horrible things are going to have you. And if you have diarrhea for 21 straight days, call a doctor.
Talk to your doctor.
Yeah. And it's like, holy crap. And again, without making light of these situations, I mean, it's a serious topic, right? But it's like, it just screams of the simple tools problem all over again. Man, like there must be a simpler remedy here, is like where my brain goes. And maybe there's not.
Yeah.
But it's where my
for a
brain
few
goes.
people, there might be the best they can do. But yeah, that's, I think the analogy is clear. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
But also if this was like really the best solution, why do they have to push it so hard on TV?
Yeah, it does make the sort of the commercial aspect of pharmaceuticals a little weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems to me like if there was a real life-saving solution, and to any problem, if there's a real credible solution to any problem, you usually don't have to push it that hard by spending hundreds of $1 million on ads, you know? So it's like something's fishy here. Yeah, something's fishy. And by the way, in most countries, I don't think they allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good move. I'd be into that.
But bagpipe gadgets are kind of like that, right? And again, I'm sorry to the inventor of the tone enhancer for picking on the tone enhancer. But that's what the tone enhancer does, I think. The tone enhancer is covering up all the downsides of playing a floppy synthetic bag. Give a pause to the tone enhancers for a second, the people out there who are tone enhancerers, and there's so many. Go for one of those rigid synthetic bags, same size as your current floppy one, but get a more rigid one and take 3 months with no tone enhancers to learn to start and stop your pipes without them. And in the long run, I think you'll be way better off. And that's just one example of the way you can reduce the complexity of your instrument right there. You'll get a better sound out of your drones as well. Your instrument will sound more rich and full. And that's just one example. I kind of would like to hammer home before we finish that it's a tough thing to talk about. And again, like I'm sure, I am actually not aware who the creator of the tone enhancer is. But this is not an attack on the tone enhancer or the creator of the tone enhancer. And obviously, a lot of people use that product. And it's a tough thing to talk about because you're talking about reducing and going simple. I feel like it's something where people tend to take it really personally sometimes. And that's not what this is, right? Like maybe you'll find that I'm totally full of it and you'll end up putting the tone enhancer back in. But I would really encourage people to do their due diligence first. And if the tone enhancer does solve a certain problem, spend some time getting up close and personal with that problem first. And make sure that you actually, with your creativity and with the specific problems and challenges that you have, really believe that the tone enhancer is the right thing. Like a lot of people are sold their bagpipes with the tone enhancer in. So they never get a chance to make that decision on their own and come up close and personal with those problems on their own. And those problems are not like life-threatening problems. Those problems are not going to damage your health, right? We're talking about not being able to stop your pipes quite as easily at first until you learn the technique. So anyway, that's just last disclaimer. Like, apologies. I know it's like an affronting kind of topic.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a good thing to make that clear. Like these tools are good and they have their place. And I mean, the tone enhancer, if it's made to address the issues that come up from using a floppy Gore-Tex bag, well, the floppy Gore-Tex bag was invented to address some issues as well. And if it makes anybody feel any better, I'm pretty sure Bill Gore is my great-great-grandpa.
Who's Bill Gore?
The guy who invented Gore-Tex.
Oh, no kidding.
So if that makes anybody feel any better, like I'm from the Gore-Tex family, and I can step forward and say that it's maybe not the best bag solution in all situations, but sometimes.
It certainly is a cool solution, though, and it certainly does solve some key problems. But not everyone understands what problems the Gore-Tex bag really did solve because they haven't experienced them. But man, it's really nice not to have to season your pipes every couple weeks.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be able to take a break from playing for a week and then not have to do a week of rebuilding the maintenance and stuff on your bagpipes in order to play again. So it does kind of solve some problems, but are there any downsides? And then how does the sound that your bagpipe produces on a Gore-Tex bag, how is it different from the sound that you get out of a hide bag? And in my experience, don't take my word for it, please, but in my experience, the sound you get out of a hide bag is slightly better than the sound that you get out of a Gore-Tex bag. So are the trade-offs worth it? And for many people, the answer is yes. And then for some people, the answer is no.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So the advocacy here is when you're starting, especially, start simple and add these things in one at a time and find, if you need them, use them because that's why they're there. They're good tools. But don't start with all the contraptions, and you never get to get your nose down in the dirt. Yeah,
bagpipers are tinkerers, right?
Oh, so yes, by nature.
Universally. Sure, yeah. Universally, and it's probably out of necessity. But we all tinker and we all do trial and error and we're all doing stuff all the time. Yeah. So when you look around, and very few great pipers would ever consider playing a tone enhancer, that should be a sign. It's not because it's not because everybody is dull and conforms to peer pressure. No, bagpiping world is not like that. It's like we're always tinkering, we're always trying different options, right? And if everybody has come to the conclusion that the tone enhancer is not the ideal solution, just think about it.
Just think about it. That's the thing, right? Because maybe in thinking about it, you'll realize, okay, but in my situation right now, I actually do want to use them. But at least you've thought about it and made that conscious decision.
Yeah, or like in this situation right now, like parade season's coming up.
Right.
And I need starts and stops to be good. So tone enhancers are in. However, in the fall, I can commit to taking a couple months, getting a new rigid bag. And that would be cool. That would be a compromise I could definitely get behind. Is to just at least get to the point where you're going to try it. And maybe after actual due diligence, you decide I'm full of crap, and then there you go.
Yeah. Makes sense to me, sir.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Okay. Good, tough episode there.
Yeah, but we made it through.
We made it through. Hit us in the comments with any questions, and we'll do another mailbag sometime soon as well. So
yeah, and if you disagree, go ahead and put that in the comments. It's cool.
Keep it civil.
Please be nice. Don't say anything about my looks, please. I can't take it.
I felt in your general direction.
Don't be the French taunter.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to. Don't say that in the comments. But
because we already know everybody's thinking it, so you don't have to. Say
it. We already know you're thinking it, so you don't have to put it. My YouTube feed has been feeding me Monty Python skits.
Oh, good. That's excellent.
What is it? Your mother smells of elderberries, and I forget what it is.
Your mother was a hamster, and your father smells of elderberries.
Was a hamster.
Yeah.
It's so great. By the way, have you ever seen I don't know, casual listeners who are done, you can turn it off now. But have you seen the Monty Python one where all of the famous communists of history are doing a game show? Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the best one ever.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the most genius skits I've ever seen. So it's like comedy through not comedy or something.
Sure.
So I think they have Karl Marx, and I forget who else they had in there. Lenin was there. Oh, and Che Guevara was there. And there might have been one other one. And they're like these very serious guys, and they're on this game show. And then they just ask them English football questions, and none of them can answer the question. It's just hilarious.
Yeah.
Here's a 3-part one for triple points. And then there's a question about the class structure and the means of production and these things. And so Karl Marx, he's like, he got the first 2 totally right. And then the last one was like, who defeated Nottingham 3-0 in 1987? And then he didn't know the answer. And it's like, oh, too bad. And it was pretty good. I don't know. I shouldn't have tried to explain the sketch.
No, explaining jokes is always the best.
No, it's actually always the worst. But I had never seen that one, but it was just like really funny.
Yeah. No, the old Flying Circus show was a big part of my childhood. So those are ingrained in my brain in a very impressionable age kind of section of my brain. Always ready to
I feel like
up.
Another one that deserves more credit than it gets is the hide and seek Olympics.
Oh yeah. A lot of the alternative Olympic skits are pretty darn good, but yeah, hide and seek Olympics is especially, yeah.
It was pretty good. I need to get into it. Is the Flying Circus on somewhere where you can just watch them?
That's actually, yes. I remember it popping up not too long ago. I can't remember now if it was on Prime or Netflix. I'm pretty sure it was one of the two.
Okay.
It's probably on Prime. So it might not be there anymore. my father, being the physical media collector that he is, has multiple versions of the complete DVD collection, the complete Blu-ray collection. And so I've just been borrowing his now, but I do remember popping up just a couple years ago. And it was actually not that long ago. It was maybe a year or two ago, because I remember starting it again. And the very first sketch includes this interview with a composer, but the composer gets increasingly angry over time because they're only asking him about his second shed. And he's like, look, I never even bought the second shed. I just mentioned that I was thinking about getting a second shed, and my friends started calling me two sheds. Can we please talk about my music? And then the reporters just kick him out of the office. They're like, you can't talk to us that way. And I love that skit because I have two sheds. And so I tell people to call me Jimmy Two Sheds.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
But yeah, I think it was on Prime. Yeah.
My children, speaking of Blu-rays and DVDs, my children think that is the most crazy advanced technology they've ever seen in their lives.
Oh, really?
It's really hard. It's really hard to explain to them. No, we've moved on from this. This is crappy old technology. And they're like, it's so shiny and it's circular. And then the machine just kind of sucks it in. They think it's the greatest thing ever. There you go. Funny. Complicated tools, and they have negative side effects. Like your kids won't believe they're not cool. When we eventually move on.
Did I ever tell you, Andrew? I don't know if you can see the 3D printer that's behind me here.
I cannot because it's narrower, but
well, it's over there. But my oldest child was several years old, maybe 4, maybe 5, when we bought our first in-home paper printer because we just had used a copy shop whenever we needed prints. And because in his life, we'd had a 3D printer since he couldn't remember. Yeah. And when I showed him that I could print out a coloring page for him on paper, this was the most novel, mind-blowing thing. Because for him, printing meant 3D printing. That's what it was normal. Yeah. And I'm like, no, look, I can print on paper. And he was like, you can do that?
Yeah. It's
blew
crazy.
His mind.
There you go. And it's like you shouldn't put moisture control systems in your children's bagpipes because like they honestly they don't understand the problems that we've already solved and then moved on from to new problems.
Yeah. This is actually relevant to the conversation. You're right. Yeah.
Well, Jim, I think it's really time to wrap it up now.
Yeah, now for reals.
I think I've managed to improve your day.
Absolutely. I feel much better now than I did when we started.
So there you go. If nothing else, keep the tone enhancers in and just rest happy.
Yeah.
Jim feels better.
I feel better.
Hey, everybody. Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.